It was 1951, and an old man in a long coat was standing before the Iranian parliament with tears streaming down his face. His name was Mohammad Mosaddegh. He was frail, dramatic, the kind of man who would hold government meetings from his bed because he claimed he was too sick to stand. But behind those watery eyes was a mind like a steel trap, and on this day, he was about to do something that would put a target on his back for the rest of his life. He asked Parliament to vote on one simple idea. The oil beneath Iranian soil should belong to the Iranian people. See, at the time, Iran's oil was controlled by something called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You might know them today by a different name, BP. And the deal they had was, well, let's just say exactly fair. Iran was getting pennies on the dollar for its own natural resource, while British shareholders got rich. Mosaddegh looked at this arrangement and said, enough. Parliament agreed. The vote passed. Iran's oil was nationalized. And thousands of miles away, in the halls of Whitehall, London, the British government went absolutely cold with fury. Britain tried everything they could think of. They slapped Iran with a crippling economic embargo. They froze assets. They yanked every British technician out of the oil refineries, which was a clever move because Iran didn't have enough trained workers to run the operations alone. They even dragged the case before the International Court of Justice, and lost. Mosaddegh, this fragile old man in pajamas, was winning. So Britain turned to America, and at first, America said no. President Truman actually had some sympathy for Iran. He thought maybe the British were being a bit greedy. But then January 1953 came around, and Truman was gone. Dwight Eisenhower was sitting in the Oval Office now, and the world looked very different through his eyes. The Cold War was at a fever pitch. The Soviet Union was the great existential threat, and the British were whispering something very specific into American ears. They were saying if Mosaddegh stays, Iran goes communist. Was Mosaddegh a communist? No, he was a nationalist. But Iran did have a growing communist party, the Tudeh Party. And in 1953, during the Cold War, that was enough. The mere possibility was enough. Eisenhower gave the order. The CIA codenamed it Operation AJAX. The British called their side Operation Boot. And the man chosen to lead the whole thing on the ground was a CIA officer named Kermit Roosevelt Jr. Yes, grandson of Theodore Roosevelt. He crossed into Iran secretly, under a fake identity, carrying what some accounts describe as a suitcase full of cash. And what he did over the next several weeks is one of the most extraordinary covert operations ever carried out. The first thing Roosevelt needed was to poison the well. He needed Iranians to turn on Mosaddegh. So, CIA money started flowing to newspaper editors, journalists, and religious leaders across Tehran. Almost overnight, articles began appearing in the press calling Mosaddegh a communist puppet, an enemy of Islam, a man who would destroy the monarchy and sell Iran to the Soviets. None of it was true. All of it was effective. The budget for the entire operation was around $1 million, which in today's money is somewhere near 11 million, and a lot of it went to the press. But propaganda alone wasn't going to overthrow a government. Roosevelt needed boots on the ground. He needed muscle. And this is where the story takes a turn that almost sounds made up. Tehran in the 1950s had an underworld. Not the mafia kind you see in movies, something uniquely Iranian. There were men called lutis, strongmen, and local bosses who ran the bazaars, the back alleys, the old neighborhoods. Some of them came from the Zurkhaneh, traditional houses of strength where men trained in ancient Persian athletics. These weren't just thugs, they were neighborhood kings. People respected them, people followed them. The most notorious of them all was a man called Shaban Jafari. His nickname was Shaban Bimok, Shaban the Brainless. He was massive, charismatic, violent when he needed to be. And he had a small army of loyal followers who would do whatever he told them. Kermit Roosevelt, through a network of Iranian intermediaries, started funneling money to Shaban and men like him. The instructions were simple. When the signal comes, flood the streets, make noise, break things. Make it look like the people of Iran are rising up against Mosaddegh. Meanwhile, Roosevelt was also working the military. Certain generals and colonels were brought into the fold. Promises were made. Money changed hands there too. And then there was the Shah himself, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the king of Iran, who was, in theory, the most powerful man in the country, but in practice was a nervous wreck. Roosevelt needed the Shah to sign royal decrees dismissing Mosaddegh from power. Without those decrees, the whole thing would look like what it was, a foreign-backed coup. With them, it could be dressed up as the king exercising his constitutional right. Getting the Shah to agree was like pulling teeth. He went back and forth, terrified of what would happen if the plan failed. His own sister, Princess Ashraf, had to be brought in to pressure him. A senior American general, Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., was flown in to reassure him. Eventually, reluctantly, the Shah signed the decrees. The first attempt came on the night of August 15, 1953. Colonel Nematollah Nasiri, a loyalist officer, was dispatched to Mossadegh's residence with the royal decree in hand. He was supposed to deliver it, and that would be the beginning of the end. But somebody had talked. Mossadegh knew they were coming. When Nasiri arrived, he was arrested on the spot. The first coup had failed before it even began. When the Shah heard the news, he panicked. He grabbed his wife, got on a plane, and fled. First to Baghdad, then to Rome. He sat in an Italian hotel room, convinced he would never see Iran again. Back in Washington, CIA headquarters sent a cable to Kermit Roosevelt. It essentially said, "The operation is over. Get out of Iran." Roosevelt read the cable, and then he did something remarkable. He ignored it. He still had his network. He still had the money. He still had Shaban the Brainless and his gangs. And he still believed this could work. Over the next 3 days, he pulled every string he had left. On August 19, 1953, Tehran erupted. Mobs poured into the streets from every corner of the city. Shaban Jafari and his men were out in force, wielding clubs, chanting against Mossadegh, moving through the neighborhoods like a wave. Other paid groups joined them, but it wasn't just hired muscle. Some genuinely anti-Mossadegh citizens came out too. People who had been swayed by weeks of planted propaganda. People who feared communism. People loyal to the Shah. The line between organic protest and manufactured chaos blurred completely. Pro-Mossadegh supporters fought back. Clashes broke out across the city. There was gunfire. Military units that had been bought by the CIA rolled tanks through the streets. The army split, some units loyal to Mossadegh, others siding with the coup. By some estimates, around 300 people were killed that day, though the true number has never been confirmed. By the afternoon, it was over. Mossadegh's home was attacked by tanks and a mob. He escaped by climbing over his garden wall, hiding for a day before surrendering. He was arrested, put on trial for treason, and convicted. He spent 3 years in a military prison and then was placed under house arrest in his rural estate. He stayed there, isolated, until he died in 1967. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Shah got the phone call. He could come home. He flew back to Tehran and was greeted as though he were a conquering hero, even though he had spent the most critical days of the operation hiding in a foreign hotel room. He was back on the peacock throne, and this time, he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. Over the next 26 years, the Shah consolidated power in ways that would have been unimaginable before the coup. He created Savak, a secret police force trained with help from the CIA and Mossad, known for its surveillance, torture, and ruthless suppression of dissent. He modernized parts of the country, built highways and universities, but he crushed political opposition without mercy. The resentment grew. Year after year, decade after decade, it grew. In 1979, that pressure finally broke. A revolution swept the Shah from power. He fled again, this time for good, bouncing between countries until he died of cancer in Egypt in 1980. In his place rose Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini and an Islamic republic that would define Iran for the next half-century and counting. The CIA did not officially acknowledge its role in the 1953 coup until 60 years after the fact. In 2013, declassified documents confirmed what the people of Iran had known all along: that their elected prime minister had been removed by a foreign intelligence operation, backed by suitcases of cash, and a man they called the Brainless. And Kermit Roosevelt? He left Iran quietly after the coup, returned to the United States, and was reportedly offered another covert operation shortly after. He turned it down. He told colleagues that what happened in Tehran had been a one-time thing, a perfect storm of circumstances.